In the year 2000, Netflix begged Blockbuster to buy them. The price was $50 million. Blockbuster laughed them out of the room. 20 years later, Netflix is worth $280 billion. Blockbuster is worth nothing. There is one location left on Earth, in Bend, Oregon, kept alive as a tourist attraction. People visit it the way they visit ruins. But here's what nobody tells you about this story. Netflix didn't kill Blockbuster. Blockbuster killed Blockbuster. And the weapon wasn't streaming. It wasn't technology. It wasn't even bad luck. It was greed, financial sabotage, and a series of decisions so reckless that even a child running the company might have done better. This is a story about $800 million stolen from customers, a private equity firm that loaded a healthy business with $1 billion of debt and walked away, and a CEO who spent lavishly on himself while the whole thing burned down around him. Pay attention, because the real villain in this story wears a suit, and it isn't Reed Hastings. To understand how Blockbuster died, you first have to understand how powerful it was. At its peak in 2004, Blockbuster had 9,000 stores across the world. It employed 84,000 people. Annual revenue hit $6 billion. In virtually every suburb in America, a Blockbuster was as common as a gas station, and the business model was almost absurdly profitable. You rented a movie for $3 or $4. The due date was written on the receipt. If you forgot to return it, and most people forgot, you paid a late fee, sometimes $1 a day, sometimes more. It added up fast. In 2000, Blockbuster collected $800 million in late fee revenue alone. $800 million in a single year, just from people returning movies late. That number wasn't an accident, it was a design. Blockbuster's entire financial model was quietly structured around the assumption that customers would be forgetful, busy, and slightly embarrassed to complain. The late fee wasn't a penalty, it was a revenue strategy. Customers hated it. Everyone who ever walked into a Blockbuster remembers the specific dread of checking the clock and realizing the movie was due back an hour ago. But Blockbuster didn't care. The money was too good, and that hatred, that slow, simmering resentment built up over millions of transactions, would eventually become the opening that every competitor needed. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Because before Netflix, before Redbox, before streaming, Blockbuster had a much more dangerous enemy. It was already inside the building. In 1994, a company called Viacom bought Blockbuster for $8.4 billion. Viacom was a media conglomerate: MTV, Nickelodeon, Paramount Pictures. They wanted Blockbuster as a distribution channel for their entertainment content. Strategic synergy, the kind of logic that sounds brilliant in a boardroom and rarely works in practice. It didn't work here. Viacom had overpaid dramatically. Almost immediately, they realized Blockbuster wasn't going to perform the way they'd modeled. By the late 1990s, Viacom wanted out, so they did what large corporations do when they want to clean up a balance sheet. They brought in outside management and started preparing Blockbuster to be spun off and sold. Enter John Antioco. Antioco became CEO of Blockbuster in 1997, and in the beginning, he wasn't the villain. He was actually quite good. He modernized operations, expanded internationally, cleaned up store layouts. Under his early leadership, Blockbuster stabilized. Then the money got interesting. By 1999, Antioco was earning a base salary of around $1 million per year, reasonable for a company of that size. But the bonuses, the stock options, the perks, those kept climbing. At the peak of Blockbuster's crisis years, Antioco's total compensation would reach approximately $51.6 million in a single year. $51 million in a year when the company was bleeding cash and closing stores. And there were other expenses. Renovations to executive offices reportedly costing millions. Corporate retreats, a lifestyle funded entirely by a company that was quietly running out of time. The people running Blockbuster were not acting like a business under threat. They were acting like the party was permanent. But in the year 2000, two things happened that should have ended the party immediately. The first was that meeting with Netflix. Reed Hastings and his co-founder Mark Randolph flew to Dallas. They sat down with Blockbuster executives and made their pitch. Netflix had been operating for 3 years. DVD by mail, no late fees, monthly subscription. The model was working, but the company was still small. They proposed a partnership or an acquisition. The number floated was $50 million. Blockbuster passed. Some accounts say the executives laughed. Others say it was a more polite dismissal. Either way, the answer was no. Netflix was seen as a niche product for internet hobbyists. Blockbuster had 9,000 stores. Why would they need a website? This decision alone has become one of the most cited strategic blunders in business history. But here's the part most people skip over. Even after passing passing on Netflix, Blockbuster still had years left to respond. The company wasn't dead in 2000. It was still generating billions in revenue. A rational response to the emerging threat was still entirely possible. What made recovery impossible wasn't the Netflix meeting. It was what happened next with the debt. In 1999, Viacom began spinning off Blockbuster as a public company. They listed it on the New York Stock Exchange. And as part of that process, Blockbuster emerged carrying approximately $1 billion in debt. $1 billion in debt, loaded onto a business that now had to compete in an increasingly hostile market while also servicing interest payments. Think about what that means practically. Every year, a significant portion of Blockbuster's operating cash, money that could have funded technology investment, online development, price reductions, was instead going to debt servicing. And then in 2004, a private equity firm named Carl Icahn got involved. Icahn acquired a major stake in Blockbuster and began pushing aggressively on the board. His goal wasn't to save Blockbuster. His goal, as with most activist investor plays, was to extract value from the asset he now partially owned. The boardroom became a war zone. Meanwhile, John Antioco had actually started doing the right thing. In 2004, finally belatedly, Antioco launched Blockbuster Online, a direct Netflix competitor, DVD by mail subscription, and he did something genuinely bold. He killed the late fee. That $800 million annual revenue line, gone, eliminated. Antioco understood that the late fee was a brand toxin. It was the thing customers hated most. Removing it was painful in the short term, but necessary for survival. The No More Late Fees campaign launched in 2005. Customers responded. Blockbuster Online was growing fast. For one brief moment, it looked like the company might actually pull off the pivot. Then Carl Icahn pulled the plug. Icahn hated the No More Late Fees policy. It was destroying short-term revenue. As a major shareholder, he could see the quarterly numbers collapsing, and he wasn't interested in long-term survival strategies. He wanted results he could monetize now. He waged a proxy war to take control of the board. He pushed to fire Antioco. He fought to reverse the no late fees policy. And here's the devastating irony. He largely won. In 2007, John Antioco was forced out. After negotiating a $54 million exit package that further enraged shareholders and drained the company, he was replaced by Jim Keyes, the former CEO of 7-Eleven. Keyes arrived and immediately began dismantling everything Antioco had built. Blockbuster Online's marketing budget was slashed. The company retreated from its digital strategy. Resources were redirected back toward physical stores. In a 2008 interview, Keyes said, and this is almost impossible to believe, that he didn't see Netflix as a threat. Netflix doesn't really have or do anything that we can't or don't already do ourselves, he said in 2008. When Netflix already had 8 million subscribers, it was like a blacksmith in 1910 saying he wasn't worried about the automobile. The next 2 years were a death spiral. Revenue collapsed. Stores closed by the hundreds. Debt obligations made every bad quarter worse. In 2010, Blockbuster filed for bankruptcy with approximately $900 million in liabilities. Dish Network bought the remaining assets for $320 million in 2011, mostly for the brand name. The stores closed almost immediately after. 9,000 locations, 84,000 jobs, a $6 billion business, gone in less than a decade. So what actually killed Blockbuster? Not Netflix. Netflix was a $50 million startup that Blockbuster could have bought, copied, or crushed at any point between 2000 and 2005. The real causes were these: $1 billion of debt strapped to the company during the Viacom spinoff, leaving no financial flexibility to invest in the future. $800 million in annual late fee revenue that created a perverse incentive to keep customers angry instead of building loyalty. A CEO compensation structure so disconnected from company performance that leadership had no real skin in the outcome. An activist investor who prioritized short-term extraction over long-term survival, and a replacement CEO who genuinely did not understand the competitive landscape he was walking into. Every one of these is a financial decision, a human decision, not a technology problem. Netflix didn't defeat Blockbuster. Blockbuster defeated itself, and then handed Netflix a market that was sitting there, completely undefended, ready for the taking. The lesson here is uncomfortable. Because Blockbuster isn't unique, this pattern plays out over and over in business history. A dominant company, a loyal customer base, real competitive advantages, and then debt, extraction, short-termism, and leaders who confuse personal wealth with company health. The late fees tell you everything. When a company starts optimizing for ways to make money off its customers' frustration rather than their satisfaction, that company is already dying. It just doesn't know it yet. The most dangerous moment for any business isn't when a competitor appears. It's when the people running it stop caring whether it survives. Blockbuster had 9,000 stores. It had the brand. It had the relationships. It even had a CEO, briefly, and who understood what needed to happen. They had every opportunity and they chose the money over the future every single time.